Hi everyone, it's Lindy on here from Pink Whisper Designs. Today I thought we'd make a vintage card. We're going to be using for stamps this beautiful lily border stamp set from Art Impressions. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start off with the largest die from the rectangle A2 double stitch die set. And for paper I'm using the Strathmore Bristol Smooth 100 pound cardstock. I've cut this piece to 3 inches by 6 inches. And we're going to place this rectangle frame down in the bottom left-hand corner. I want to line that up and just tape that down with a little bit of purple tape. So we're going to die cut this, and that'll give us a 3-inch panel. And it'll have stitching on 3 sides. So I'm running that through the die cutting machine. Now here's this beautiful lily border stamp, and you do get the little center for the flower as well. I'm going to place that panel in my Mini Misty stamp positioner. We want to place the stamp off to the right hand side here. This side has no stitching on it towards the right. The top, bottom, and left have the stitching. So we're going to place this towards the right, but we want to leave a little bit of room there because we're going to be needing about a 1/16 of an inch border all the way around this when we cut this out. So you do want to keep that in mind when you're positioning this down. I've gone ahead and stamped it with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. For colors, I'm using Sugared Almond Pink, Mid Green, and Olive Green. And I'm going to just show you simply how I colored these in. So these are water-based markers, so I'm just laying down a little bit of the pink, then I'm coming in with the blender pen and blending that out. And I'm adding more layers of color using that same Sugared Almond Pink. I'm not going to introduce a second color here. I'm just going to add a little bit more of that color until I get the shading that I need. Because I do want to keep this very soft. Again, we're going for kind of a vintage look here, so I don't want my colors to be too bright. So I'm just going to add that little bit of shadow there, trying to keep the tips of these petals as light as possible here. And again, I'm using the blender pen, and if you get too much ink, you can just scribble it onto your scrap paper. And to change colors, you want to scribble your blender pen onto your scrap paper until it goes clear. And then you'll know that it's clean. Now here I'm using the 2 shades of green, just to add a little shadow here, kind of at the base of the leaves, and sort of where those flowers meet the stems. And I went ahead and colored all of that in. So now here's the fun part. You have the center for the flowers. I'm placing that on a small acrylic block, and I'm using my aged mahogany Distress Oxide ink to do my stamping. And again, this is to keep with that vintage tone. Now you could certainly use a really bright color here if you were going for a different look, but I thought this aged mahogany really kept it in this vintage look here. So I'm adding that in, and this is really fun to do. It's really easy to do. I thought it was going to be a little bit more difficult to line it up, but no matter which way I stamped it, it seemed to come out perfectly. So now I want to cut a straight line up to these flowers from the top and the bottom. So I'm placing it in my Fiskars paper trimmer, and I'm going to pull that blade down just till I just about get to those images. Remembering that we want to keep about a 1/16 of an inch of white around this flower when we cut it out. So I don't want to go right up to the flower. You do want to lift the blade and then bring it down to the other side and do the same thing. So you can see that I've cut up from the top and from the bottom. And now I'll leave about a 1/16 of an inch border around these flowers, just towards the right hand side. So here is where I'm just going to use my detail scissors and just start trimming that out. Now you can be as fussy as you want to be here. I enjoy fussy cutting, so I find this very relaxing. But what I do want to say is move the paper, not your scissors. Try to keep your scissors in one place and just move that paper around. It makes it a lot easier to cut these little detailed images. So you can see that I'm just shifting that paper as I go. Again, leaving that little border around. And then when you get here, you want to just cut right up to that straight line. Now I'll just trim out the excess from this little spot here, and you can see that there. Now I wanted to add a little bit of like a crocheted border here, a lacy border. So I'm going to grab that second one down. These are the Sizzix Thinlits from Tim Holtz, and this one is called Crochet. So I'm going to just cut this out of some Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock. So I need a panel that's going to be 5.5 inches long, and that'll fit that die exactly. And then approximately 1.5 inches here, just to make sure we have enough room to cut this out. So I'm going to place a little bit of tape on this. This is the purple tape, and I'll run that through the die cutting machine. And I do want to run this through, I ran this through about 4 times, I believe, just to make sure that you cut out all that little detail. Now I'm going to use my Spellbinders tool-in-one and my little foam pad. This is the foam pad I use to sculpt flowers, and I will list that down below for you, as well as all the other products I'm using today. And you can see it has this little brush on the end, which allows you to punch out all those little items very quickly. And then it has a little poke tool on the other end. Now, grabbing this fancy die from Hero Arts, which is this beautiful wood grain, and this is called the Woodgrain Fancy Die, it's going to cut that detail out of it. It's going to almost emboss it in there. So I'm going to just run this through 2 times. And I've got some 100-pound craft cardstock that I'm using to run this through. You don't want to run it through too many times because it will start to separate this panel. And you can see there you get that beautiful wood grain, but it does cut through a few little areas. So what I like to do is back that with an extra piece of cardstock. So I've just gone ahead and cut an extra piece, 4¼ by 5.5, and I'm going to add plenty of this adhesive. This is the Nouveau Deluxe adhesive to the back of this panel, just to make sure none of those little pieces pop up. Like I say, when you die cut this, it does separate in a few little areas there. So I'm going to use my We Are Memory Keepers bone folder and just make sure I really press that out. And that's going to give us a nice thick panel here as well. I'm using Vintage Photo, Ground Espresso, and Black Soot Distress Oxide inks to do my coloring. So I want to give this an aged wood grain effect. So I'm starting off with that Vintage Photo, and I'm not going to make this even. I'm just kind of randomly placing this base color down. I do want to put it all over, but I don't need it to be even all over. I just want to apply a little bit of color here. Then I'm going to come in with the Ground Espresso. And again, now a little bit more random here, just kind of adding some color here. I want to leave some of those lighter areas to give it really that natural look of wood grain. And then I'll take the Black Soot because I did want to age this just a little bit more. And I'm adding the Black Soot to the corners and kind of around those edges a little bit. And then I'll go back to the Vintage Photo and just kind of blend anywhere that looked kind of just too uniform or too much like a spot of color. I'm just blending that out. So you can see that gives it a really nice aged look. Now to age it a little bit more, I'm taking the Ground Espresso, placing some on my glass media mat. I'm going to spritz that with a little bit of water from my Distress sprayer. And then I'll spatter that with a paintbrush. And again, I thought this just gave it a little bit more of an aged, textured look, but you could certainly skip the spattering here if you wanted to. Now to age this little crocheted border, I'm going with the Vintage Photo, and you really just want to kind of pat this on because this is a very delicate die. So I'm just kind of patting that lighter color on, and then I'm going to add the Ground Espresso just around those edges, kind of on those scallopy edges, just to darken those up a little bit. And you can see that up close there. So now going back to those same 2 colors again, I'm going to add a little shadow around this panel. So I'm just coming in and just kind of adding that lighter color and just leaving a little halo of the white around the flowers. Now you could also use a little dauber here as well if you're worried about getting too close to those flowers. And again, you just want to do this just very lightly, and then I'm going to come in with that ground espresso and just go around the edges. Just again, darkening up the corners a little bit here. And going back to the vintage photo just to blend that out a little bit better. Oh, let's pick the sentiment here. And I'm going to this Art Impressions set that was done in conjunction with scrapbook.com. And this is the exclusive Hydrangea set. And this sentiment says, sending a garden of happy wishes. That one there. But there are some beautiful flowers and sentiments on this set as well. Now for my little banner, I'm using the flag double stitch die set. And I'm going to position some cardstock in my mini Misty stamp positioner. And then I'm going to just figure out about where I want this sentiment to be on that little flag. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'll stamp that a couple of times. Now I can position this flag die, and I want to keep that sentiment towards the right hand side. I'm taping it down with some purple tape, and I'll run that through my Sizzix Sidekick machine. And that will leave a pretty stitch border around this flag as well. Now I'm going back to those same two colors again and just starting with the vintage photo. And I just want to bring that color in just a little bit here around the edges, just to soften this and age this a little bit. And then I'll take the ground espresso and I'll just go right around those edges, just to frame this. And I don't need to do that left side there. That's going to get covered. So now I've got my panel. It's all dry. I'm going to take a standard A2 top folding card, which measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm using my Scotch ATG permanent tape dispenser to tape this down. And I'll just press that out again with the bone folder. Now for these pieces here, what I want to do is attach that little crocheted border right behind this. And I'm just going to cover that straight edge of the crochet. I just want the little scallopy pieces to show. So I'm using my 1/4 inch score tape. This is a really sturdy double stick tape. So I'm going to place a strip of it right down that side there. And then I'll remove the backing from that and line up this crocheted border. Again, just going right up to the scalloped area there. I do want to take a little time to make sure that's nice and straight. Now my sentiment is going to need to fit behind here. And I do want to make sure that this panel with the sentiment isn't any wider than 4 1/4 because that's the width of my card. So I'm going to play around with this a little bit and position it so that it measures 4 1/4 there by 5 1/2. So that'll fit right on the front of my card. So if you want your sentiment to be up higher or lower, you want to take that into consideration when you're designing the card. And I'll show you what I mean by that at the end of this video. I have a second card that I'll show you at the end. So now I'm adding some Scotch foam mounting tape to the back of this, and I'm just cutting it into little strips. And we'll pop this up on the front of our card. And I'm positioning that crocheted scalloped edge right along the edge, the left side of my card here. And that will fit perfectly, again, that 4 1/4 width. So now to decorate this a little bit, I grabbed some pearls that I had in my stash. These are kind of a vintage looking pearl. And I'm going to add the little tiny ones in the centers of each of those little scallops. And they do have adhesive on them, but I like to add glue as well. Sometimes with just the adhesive, they do pop off, so I like to add a little touch of glue there just to make sure that they don't go anywhere. And then I'll add a few more off to the right-hand side here. Now the card, there's a second card again I'll show you at the end where I use some pink gems instead of these pearlized ones. And I'll show you that here in a second. So let me show you this card. Let's get a closer look at it. And you can see that we have this beautiful vintage look to this card. I just think this is so pretty. I love these flowers and how cute it is to stamp the little centers in the flowers. This is a really versatile set. And now here's the pink. I use these pink kind of sparkly rhinestones just to give it a little bit more of a glittery effect. But it still has that vintage look to it. And here's where I made that panel a little bit narrower so that I could move that sentiment down further on the card. So you do want to adjust the width of that panel depending where you want to put that sentiment. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to visit me at pinkwhisperdesigns.com. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.